Alrighty. So my name is Christopher Gusman. I was a former special education administrator and principal here in Plymouth, and I am on the board of directors as well as the special education chair for the Mass PTA. So I'm going to talk about 504 plans, and this is probably the easiest out of all of what I've talked about. What is it, or how will it help my student? So it ensures access by providing students with disabilities, or rather with the appropriate accommodations and or services so that they can reach the FAPE, which is free and appropriate public education, along with their non-disabled peers. While IEPs and 504s are both federal, 504s carry over to the university setting. That's something that not a lot of people do. So why do they call it that? Because Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, it was designed to prevent any students with a disability from discrimination due to that disability. So that's why they get 504 plan. And the big question is, okay, so how do I qualify for my student? Under the federal and state special education laws, and that's different than, it's a little bit different than the IEP if we're talking about specialized education, not necessarily special education. So does a student have a recognized disability, which I will go over in the next slide? And then is the student not making effective progress because of the disability, or do they need specialized instruction and or related services to make that effective progress in the general curriculum? So Section 504 is essentially like a giant umbrella. And there's a lot that is included in that. Occasionally you'll have students with a disability, but the disability doesn't always impair their effective progress. So a 504, however, essentially says that they have a disability and it sometimes inhibits their ability to make effective progress. So it's a little bit looser, if you will. So individual handicaps talk about physical or mental impairments. A lot of times our students have significant anxiety or sound issues. So they have a record of such an impairment. So it could be a letter from a doctor stating that they, the student suffers from XYZ. And then is regarded as having such an impairment. Again, it's essentially a letter from the doctor. And then it further defines physical or mental as any psychological disorder condition, cosmetic disfigurement, anatomical loss, neurological. So anything mental or psychological disorder, mental retardation. This is law. I literally copied it from the law. So this is all from the law, as we don't, organic brain syndrome, emotional mental illness. So these are all identified as part of Section 504. So how does my student qualify? And what if I disagree? Can I ask for an independent evaluation? Now, if your student does not qualify whenever they talk about 504s, there is no independent evaluation that can be done. You can, however, go to and pay for it yourself. Especially if your student, if you think it's more of an emotional issue, so that if your student is seeing a therapist and the therapist has diagnosed your student with A, B, and C, then they can write a letter with your permission stating that student has been diagnosed with A, B, and C. This may inhibit or may affect the way their school day is, may have difficulty with taking tests. Sort of have the therapist write a letter stating what the disability is and how that disability could affect your student's ability to make effective progress. That will qualify them for a 504. So really, what's in a 504 plan? Go figure, there is no standard 504 plan. It could look different from district to district. The one saving grace is that there are very few student information systems. And so each student information system has sort of a standard way of putting together a 504. So they're all kind of the same. And it includes, much like an IEP, it includes specific accommodation supports and services, who will provide those services, and then a person that's responsible for ensuring that the plan is implemented. In most schools and school districts, that is the guidance counselor. The guidance counselors are generally in charge of the 504 plans. So for each plan, there is notice and consent. Anything that the school does, they have to notify you about. That's just a blanket. Any change in placement. So if they, your student isn't doing well in their honors class, we're taking them out and we're putting them in, a lower level class, then they have to tell you that, you should be notified in writing, as well as a call. And then also they have to give consent, or you have to give consent to the district, and there'll be a form that you have to sign that says we are going to test the child or evaluate the student for issues in reading, or whatever they decide, or you guys decide as a group, as sort of a team. Like the IEP team, there's also a 504 team. I know that for middle and high school, they try to get as many people involved as possible, which is great because then you get a whole view. And I would always ask for that student's preferred adult at the school. So that's, it's to sort of provide their input. Generally, it's reviewed each year, and like an IEP, every 3 years, there is a reevaluation. If something is not going right, if you think that the 504 plan is either not being followed or is not helping, is helping too much, then you can always ask for a review or just a meeting to go over the 504, and always go in with a plan and address the parts of the 504 that either are or are not working. That way it can be improved upon. So, and again, if we do have disputes, so a lot of times we find that 504s are not working, especially during this time of COVID, where we're having issues. If your student has sort of academic issues that aren't being met via hybrid learning, then you can always ask for different types of learning. And if that still does not work, then mediation. So all of those are sort of they get external entities involved. I've only in very contentious I guess, situations have I ever heard that 504 has gone to mediation. It doesn't happen a lot. It happens a lot more with IEPs. Schools are really, I guess they're more lenient with 504s, and they're more likely to give you additional services through 504s. Do I have any questions so far? And like IEPs, all 504s are changed, or rather, during the senior year, they're reflected, essentially creating a new one at the end of towards the end of the senior year. So that way they can be taken to college or whatever external supports that the student may need in the future. This was a really short presentation because there's not really a lot to it. If we kind of go over essentially how it starts as my student is having difficulties, and what is a teacher doing or not doing in order to help support my student. And a lot of times we have to, as a group, come together and say, you know, this is my student, he's having difficulty in science because his reading is very low. His reading skills are low, and science is one of those classes where you have to be close to grade level in order to understand everything. So, so essentially as a team, we figure out how can we best support the student. And then as a team, it might be reading aloud or having somebody read to them. You know, having all of the books now are on tape, or providing assistive technology. Those are all things that can be done now with a computer or a tablet, because all the books now are, you know, they have online access. So anyway, so it's just essentially the school agreeing to allow the student to, like I just said, additional supports to scaffold their learning. But there has to be a disability involved. It can be an emotional, a health related, diabetes qualifies the student, asthma qualifies as a disability. Some of them are just to allow, it doesn't always have to be an academic issue. For example, if a student is severely diabetic or is severely asthmatic and has to attend and has to go to a lot of doctor's appointments, then in a 504, it would allow for that student to sort of, to, let's say, miss 1 day a week. I had a student with that was diagnosed with a severe form of epilepsy, and the student had to receive essentially services once a week on a Friday, blood tests, see the doctor, whatever, for a year. And so that we had to put him on an IEP because he was going to miss like 30 days. So those are, you know, those are different, those are situations that that would qualify a student for an IEP. I'm sorry, for a 504 versus an IEP. Does anybody have any questions?
I think we did have someone with their hand up. If you want him to ask his question now.
Sure, go ahead.
Perfect.
Okay, thank you very much. That was a very informative presentation. I'm just going to ask my question very generally because this session is being recorded. But for a student who has a condition that is not yet diagnosed, but that a therapist has identified as having a condition that, will get diagnosed. It just needs to take some time to get the appointments lined up and everything. In your experience, do schools generally, work with the families to set up the 504 before the formal diagnosis is received? Or is there, a requirement to have the formal diagnosis in hand before any 504 plan is set?
Legally, you have to have the diagnosis in hand. Now, a therapist can actually, LICSW, licensed independent social worker, I think they're called. They can write a letter and they can actually diagnose according to the DSM-5. So they would write a letter, a student exhibits the following behaviors. Again, this is with parent guardian permission, which are indicators of the ADHD, whatever, some diagnosis X.
But that would be someone
qualify.
Would be someone with a doctorate.
No.
Okay.
It can be a licensed independent it's LICSW, but it has to be I forgot what the actual acronym. Licensed independent clinical social worker.
Okay.
In short, that's the highest level without a doctorate. And the district can take that one.
Okay.
And then use that as a formal diagnosis until something from a PhD or an MD comes in. You're a family doctor, because generally what happens is that the LICSW will communicate, and personally speaking, my LICSW communicated with my child's MD, primary care physician, and the primary care physician then wrote the letter. So that way it sort of came from
right.
an MD.
I'm not sure in this particular situation that the recommendation was coming from someone with those credentials that you mentioned.
Oh, okay.
I'll need to check.
Yeah.
She's a counselor. I'm not sure if she has those credentials, but
oh, okay. So yeah, just but I would definitely have them communicate with the doctor.
Right.
And the doctor, 9 times out of 10, will write the letter stating that the student has been diagnosed by their therapist as having ABC, which would affect their academics, sort of something very generic, honest, generic, and would qualify them for a 504.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you.
No problem. I know this was really short, and it's 504s, or if you have documentation, a lot of times students have emotional issues. They see a therapist, the therapist then writes a letter to the doctor, to their primary care physician, and the primary care physician then essentially writes the formal letter. There's actually, most districts have a form. And that you pick up the form from the district, or they can email it to, which generally now they just email it to you. And then drop it by the doctor's office, give the doctor a few days to fill it out, and then pick it up. So, but it's yeah, it's just for a lot of districts, it's a form. That's it. So
Awesome.
Madison, I'm sorry about the last one being so short, but it's
No, I mean,
pretty-
short and sweet is what we need, right? You don't always need an hour presentation to get your point across. So